Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you know when live we go. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified. In the next 35 minutes, I'm going to take you through today's newspaper, the Hindu Delhi edition, and we will take up discussion on most relevant articles for the civil service examination. The articles that we will take up for discussion has been tabulated on your screen and time stamping for the same has been given in the description section. There is a very interesting article on page number 7 with the title Swarms of Extremism. In this article, writer explores a concept called as swarm intelligence. Swarm generally means large and dense group of insects. In the article, writer has tried to connect the swarm intelligence in animals and insects with human behavior, especially in the political discourse. The learning value of this article is very high. This article can be utilized in writing answers of society paper of GS paper 1, of polity and social justice section of GS paper 2, and it can be very well utilized in writing the introduction of essays that you will be practicing. You must have observed collective behavior in animals, in flock of birds, in school of fish, in herds of animals, in group of ants, bees. These birds, bees, ants, fishes, and even larger animals like horses and bulls and wolves, they have evolved a system to amplify their intelligence by thinking together in a system. Their swarms is smarter together than individuals. For not just a response against a stimuli, for example, they respond together, they turn in the same direction when a predator comes to attack them. But this is not just against an external danger. Even when they decide the direction to follow to reach their destination, the food they must eat, the shelter that they must choose, the location of the shelter, all the decisions are made collectively in a smart and intelligent manner. The collective decision takes place without a global controller. The individual units are locally communicating with each other. They form a feedback system deeply interconnected, which gives birth to a new intelligence system with its own personality and intellect. Biologists call this swarm intelligence, also called as hive mind. It's a natural step in evolution for most social species. Swarm intelligence is a very technical subject, and this is still an evolving topic, and researchers are still going on to find out how animals communicate in a swarm. We know very little about it, so we will not be getting into the technicality of the topic. However, if you just have to make a comparison, human brain is made up of many neurons. Human brain basically is a system of neurons so deeply interconnected that it forms an intelligent system. The size of the brain of insects are around 1 lakh times smaller than human mind. But still the group intelligence of these insects are comparable to human mind. So a swarm can actually be considered to be brain of brains, and instead of neurons, the brain is the unit in one swarm. So just like human mind is collection of neurons, the swarm is the collection of brain of various insects or even the brain of various larger animals. There is very fast communication among two center of neuron, and same happens in a swarm. The communication happens in split of a second, and that system we don't understand very well how it happens, but some communication goes on within a fraction of a second among members of a swarm. So that kind of signaling process is happening brain to brain. Let us consider an example. Let's take example of honeybees. Honeybees collectively are considered as very intelligent community. Suppose there is a problem in hand in community of honeybees, and the problem is to find a new shelter, a new home to move into. The home could be in a hollow log, on the side of a building, under a water tank, below a tree branch, or at any other place. It sounds like a simple problem, but it's a life or death decision that can impact the survival of a colony for generations. Honeybees are going to take this decision very seriously. To solve this problem, the colony sends hundreds of Scott bees into the field. They search dozens of candidate sites. That's the easy part. The hard part is picking the best possible solution of all the options that they have discovered. But the honeybees have tiny brain. It's smaller than grain of a sand, has less than a million neurons. We have 85,000 million neurons. So the size of the brain of honeybees is 85,000 times smaller than human. That also means that intelligence of honeybees would be 85,000 times less than humans. However, the honeybees are very smart house hunters. Biologists have shown that honeybees pick the best possible solution over 80% of the time. They take into consideration various factors. For instance, their shelter must be large enough to store the honey for winter, ventilated enough to stay cool in the summer, insulated enough to stay warm in cold nights, protected from the rain. There must be good source of clean water, and most importantly, the shelter must have a nearby good source of pollen. This is a complex multi-variable problem. To optimize survival, the bees need to pick the best possible solution across all competing constraints. But honeybees have brains so tiny that they can't even conceive this problem, let alone solving it. But when they think together in system, they can solve it accurately. They can even rival a human brain. Question is, how do they do this? The answer is they do it by forming a swarm intelligence, a brain of brain that combines the knowledge and wisdom and insight and intuition of a group and converges on an optimized decision. But this group interaction that leads to swarm intelligence, how exactly that happens, we know very little of. In case of honeybees, we have quite bit of a knowledge, but in case of other animals, how they do it, in case of fish, for example, we know very little how they perform it. Honeybees do it remarkably by vibrating their bodies. Biologists call it waggle dance. To us humans, it appears that bees are dancing, but actually they are vibrating their body to generate signals that presents their support for various options under consideration. And by combining these signals, the bee engage in multi-directional tug of war, pushing and pulling on the decisions until they find one of the solution that can be best agreed upon, and it's usually the optimal solution. But it works so well only because, unlike human, they don't get entrenched. They don't fall into the gridlock. They don't lock their horns. They don't dig into their heels. Meaning they are flexible in decision making. They don't allow ego to overshadow the group interest. And they don't settle with a bad solution that nobody is happy with. They find the solution that is best for the group as a whole. Now the big question is, will swarm intelligence work in human behavior, particularly in the political movements? See, we humans are pretty smart as individuals, but in groups, we are not always so smart. The group intelligence does not get exhibited so often. Just like the honeybees, we also give our opinion. But honeybees give opinion through signals. Human beings give opinions via votes, polls, surveys, etc. The problem is that in polls and votes, there is polarization. They drive us to the trench, exposing and reinforcing our differences, but not helping to find a common ground. Bees are able to find a common ground. We are not able to do that because we are not flexible and dynamic like swarms. We don't review what we agree upon. This ability of swarms to remain flexible and dynamic and reviewing the options that they agree most with makes these species not just smarter but also wiser. The most important condition for collective intelligence to get exhibited is the individual components must be able to gather evidence themselves without being told what to think. But humans' ability to know what to think without being told what to think has eroded already. And this has happened mostly because of the misinformation that is broadcasted by the media, by various broadcasting media agencies. And we broadcast vast amount of information, but same information to vast number of individuals. So large number of individuals are basically carrying same information. So they are correlated information. However, the animal groups avoid having correlated information. But unfortunately, in human society, we rely too much on correlated informations. The author makes a fair comparison. The author talks about both the right wing movement and left wing movement and describes the problem of both the movements, and he tries to explain why there is no swarm intelligence in both kind of movements. For the right wing movement, he says that the group intelligence of human beings has been integrated with many leadership models. The leaders provide the focus of attention, then that is upscaled by swarms of followers engaged in binary conversations. A leader signals something, whether it is the need to distort history, create a false sense of assurance in faltering economy, fuel hate against somebody, or signal success when strategies fail. From there on, the swarm of followers take over to create simple messages, fake news, sloganeering, and hate. Individuals down the ladder, short of individual capabilities for critical thinking, share messages in a binary manner, amplify them, and make hashtags trend. That's how it's working. So, collection of various information by various members of the swarm and having discussion on it and then converging to the most acceptable decision as happens in the swarm of animals does not happen in swarm of humans. This is basically sharing the messages in binary manner and just amplification of the same message that has been thrown down from the top. So basically, group intelligence is not in action. The writer also has something to say about left-wing movements. In case of left-wing movement, he says, liberals are ruggedly individualistic and specially unsuited for being part of any swarm. They reject binary communications and they see their proximate supporters as competitors rather than a part of a larger coordinated order. So in right-wing movement, there is a swarm, but there is no group intelligence. In left-wing movement, there is no swarm at all. But in both, there is no swarm intelligence. However, the author do identify some of the movements that have shown swarm intelligence. They were free from any external control. They were not self-centric. They didn't have top-to-bottom approach. They didn't have any leader. They were leaderless movement with intelligent thinking members. For instance, the movement going on in Hong Kong for at least a year. The Arab Spring. It had elements of swarm intelligence backing the flowering and upscaling of pro-freedom movements. We have this culture of grouping, and we have this cadre of people in political discourse that are involved in upscaling the messages that have been given from the top. However, eliminating this political swarm is neither practical nor desirable. What we need is more compassionate thinking and inclusive swarms. Then we can come close to the swarm intelligence that various insects and animals have, and we can make decisions in the group interest rather than selfish individualistic interest. There are two articles on India-China border standoff. One of that is on page number 1 with the title Restore April Status Along Line of Actual Control. That is India's stand in the present ongoing negotiations. India wants status quo ante, meaning status quo that was present before, and India wants the status quo to be restored, which was there in the month of April. This issue was covered already in the DNS of 6th of June. The second article is an interview, and this is an important one because this is the interview of Jaidev Ranade, who was the former cabinet secretary and president of Center for China Analysis and Strategy, and he has been tracking China for last 3 decades. So his point of view is very important, and I will be summarizing this interview in a form that will be consumable for the mains examination. The current situation on the line of actual control is very unusual. It's unlike any of the standoff that India-China had previously. This is because the present standoff has occurred at multiple points along the line of actual control from Ladakh to Nakula Pass in the Sikkim. The activation of a new diplomatic front by Nepal against us is completely new. This was not to be seen anywhere before, anywhere in the previous standoff. The communist government of Nepal has taken a very hardened stand against India. They are also amending their constitution. The nature and kind of intrusion has also altered. During the tenure of President Xi Jinping, things have become more strategic and planned. They were previously also premeditated and planned, but in the recent time, things have become more firm. In today's newspaper, there are reports that China is sending their air forces to strengthen their already mobilized army along the LAC. Unlike some of the previous border issues, the present one is not a purely border issue. This is not. This is not because of just different perception of LAC by India and China. If that would have been the reason, then Galwan Valley is one of the point of contention along LAC. Galwan Valley has not been the point of confrontation now. This has been kept out of the present confrontation. So these are some of the points that make the present standoff different and hence forces us to think that there is a larger design to the Chinese intrusion along the region of LAC. There are some reasons given out by the interviewee in the interview as to why this is happening. Some of the possible reasons suggested are as follows. The construction of Darbuk Chayok Daulat Beg Oldie Road. This is a road that was in construction since 20 years, but recently this road has been completed and other infrastructure facility along this road has been added. This road basically connects Leh, the capital of Ladakh, via the villages of Darbuk and Chayok with Daulat Beg Oldie post. This is a post very near to Chinese border. Although China has been upgrading their infrastructure facility on their side of LAC, there is no point why India can't do it on this side, but still Chinese are making an issue out of this. We have upgraded other logistic infrastructure mainly for the purpose of defense along LAC along with DSDBO road. In the recent past, as being suggested by the interviewee, China has acquired tangible strategic and financial stakes in Pakistan occupied Kashmir and in the Gilgit-Baltistan region. This was not there earlier. Now, since they have their stake in the region, they feel more apprehensive of the safety of their projects. They also have invested hugely in China-Pakistan economic corridor, and this has further increased their stake. The surgical strike that we carried out, the airstrike on Balakot, which was just 30 kilometers away from one of their projects in the region, have made them more apprehensive and heightened their concern in the region. But perhaps the more important and immediate reasons are apprehension of Chinese government that what will happen after revocation of Article 370 and 35A of our constitution. The interviewee highlights a very important point that you have to keep in mind. This is for both your mains and interview. Chinese have a larger global agenda. China considers itself too powerful and it doesn't see any need to cooperate with India to operate its business in Asia. And the plan that Chinese government have for India is to keep India in South Asia box, not allowing India to be more free and working out of South Asia box. That's their evil intent. So their plan is to keep us embroiled in the regional issues and keep taking away our partners like they have taken away Nepal. Then the question is, why did China do this and why at this time? The interviewee has given many reasons, very important for your understanding. One of the reasons is economic reason. In most of the conflicts, the underlying basic cause is economic cause. And so is here. The interviewee has pointed out that there has been US-China trade war and that has been aggravating. The unemployment situation in China is very bad. Unemployment has risen from 20 million to 70 million recently. There also has been voice of discontent that was not coming up, but people were finding a suitable time to voice their concern. A vast section of Chinese society don't want to return to one-man rule, as is being done under President Xi Jinping. China had two dreams. One was the China dream, the dream of dominating the Asia region, and the other was catching up, if not surpassing, the US by 2049. But because of the conflict and trade war with US and the slowdown in their economy, they are not seeing this happening. And if that doesn't happen, then the internal discontent will increase and people will get more opportunity to voice their concern, maybe in a form of protest. Also, because of the ongoing Hong Kong protest and criticism coming from Taiwan, there is a general perception in China that the leadership is no longer effective. This is one of the real reasons why Xi Jinping has opted for a much tougher line. In Hong Kong, they have come up with public security bill. In Taiwan, they are applying external pressure. In South China Sea, the president has started sending PLA Navy warships. And the border standoff with India come along in the same series. There is also a very strong anti-China sentiment building up in the world. Creating conflict and breaking up border issue is also a Chinese strategy to divert the attention from what happened in Wuhan in October-November last year. This could also be covert threat to the nations to not participate in anti-Chinese grouping. Finally, to close the thread, we have to ask this question: what options India have? What can we do? According to the interviewee, we can do this and we can do that. But it is mostly dependent on Chinese government, their willingness to resolve the issue. If they don't want to resolve the issue and if they want to stretch it up, the issue will be stretched up. Because he argues, if Xi Jinping has adopted a tougher line, can he afford to pull back? Because after the resolution of the Doklam issue, there was severe criticism of the president and the government in China. The leadership came into question and they were projected as ineffective. One of the underlying causes of the hardened stand of the president, as we have seen, is the criticism that the leadership has become ineffective, mostly in the case of Hong Kong and Taiwan. Then the question is, in this scenario, will the president soften his stand? And that's the argument that Jaidev Ranade has taken in the interview. But as conclusion to your mains answer, you'll have to write certain points, and I keep it open to you. What will you write as a suggestion? What could be India's strategy? What institutional measures India can take to discipline China? There is a news on page number 7, addressing the elephant in the room. The news last week about a pregnant elephant dying after having her mouth blown after eating a cracker-stuffed pineapple has created a lot of outrage on social media. It is impossible not to empathize with the pain of the elephant and many other wild animals who are having unfortunate death. But in this article, the author has presented an alternative point of view, an alternative narrative, the pain and suffering of farmers who are struggling to save their crops from wild animals. This article basically focuses on man-animal conflict and is very important under the environment section of GS paper 3. When you complete the notes of your environment, you have to check whether you have notes on man-animal conflict or not. It's a very important topic. Caution on this has not come in mains yet, but it was expected in last few years. It remains an important topic for the mains exam. What are the reasons behind increasing man-animal conflict? Human population explosion and rapid unplanned urbanization is basically the underlying cause of most of the problems that we are having. What this does is it shrinks the forest cover, limiting the amount of food available in the forest area. That forces the animals like rhesus monkey to come out of the forest area in search of food in the human habitats. Also, unplanned urbanization destroys the natural corridors for animals to pass from one habitat to another. And in absence of any corridor for animals to pass, the natural course that they take is through the agricultural land, in the process destroying the crop cover. This problem has been identified lately, and there has been effort made to identify various corridors, and some 204 elephant corridors have been identified throughout India. Also, there has been exponential increase in the infrastructural development in the forest areas. This has led to penetration of high voltage electric lines in the forest areas and increase in the road density. Because of the electric lines carrying current and high voltage, there has been electrocution. The animals are being attracted by powerful electric field towards the wire and they are dying out of it. Also, because of the vehicles, they are dying in the road accident. Increased human population has forced the agricultural expansion in the forest boundaries. These agricultural land very near to the forest area tempts the wild animal to come to the edge of the forest area to feed on these accessible food crops. There are legal and administrative reasons as well. India does not allow rural people to hunt animals. But neither does the government cull animals regularly despite their numbers shooting up. In the Western countries, they follow the norm boars eating crops, people eating boars. They allow farmers to kill and eat the wild boars. So it keeps the number of wild boars, the largest destroyer of the crops, in check. We also have this concept of vermin animals. They are those animals listed under Schedule 5 of Wildlife Protection Act 1972. And if an animal is listed under Schedule 5, it is declared as vermin. That means you can easily kill the animal. There is no problem. But it is largely the administrative responsibility to kill the vermins because it cannot be done by individual farmers. But administration becomes hesitant to cull vermins because of the hoo-halla that is created on social media by animal rights groups. According to the author, there is no empathy for the farmers who struggle to make their ends meet while growing food for all of us. There are three basic problems which particularly the farmers face. First, the compensation schemes run by various state government and even the central government are useless in a sense that they are trapped between the bureaucratic layers. The process of getting compensation is very slow. There is no proper way of taking the stock after destruction of the crop by wild animals. The process is ineffective, the payment is inadequate. Even the insurance schemes do not cover the crop loss because of man-animal conflict. The Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana covers the loss of the notified crop due to natural calamity, pests and diseases. It does not cover loss due to wild animals. And this destruction of crops by wild animals is a recurrent phenomena. It happens at a higher scale every year before monsoon. Author offers some solution to the problem. First and foremost, institutionally controlling the vermin population. The local administration must take the charge. Wild boars are declared as least concern, so they should be added in the Schedule 5 of Wildlife Protection Act and they must be declared as vermins and their population must be controlled by regular culling. But care must be taken that locally wild boars do not get threatened or get extinct. Farmers should be empowered and subsidized to better protect their land rather than wait for compensation or be forced to resort to these extreme illegal measures that we have seen recently. Perhaps the most important and planned measure that can be taken is institutional measures, National Board for Wildlife and Forest Advisory Committee. They are meant to scrutinize and minimize the large-scale diversion of forest land for development projects. But these institutions have not been bestowed with adequate powers to carry out these functions. The government is also easing up environmental clearance. For example, recently, clearance was given to a coal mine inside Elephant Reserve in Assam. Then you must be able to think of some innovative solutions that you might be reading in the newspapers. There are some animals which are trained. For example, in Kerala, elephants are trained actually to chase away other wild animals. You must also have heard in news in Kenya and in other African nations, farmers grow line of chilies as a boundary to their agricultural land. This chase away wild animals. And these animals, especially wild elephants, have very high cognitive memory. If once they encounter chilies, they will never come again in that path or near that agricultural land. So you can think of some other innovative solutions that can be taken up, and for the benefit of all of us, mention that in the comment section. All in all, it is our greed that has destroyed vast tracts of forest and thousands of elephants and other animals over last few decades. The poor farmer who kills few wild animals in an attempt to feed us while making enough money for himself is actually much less responsible. So, the interest of both the wild animals and the poor farmers must be taken together. There is a news on page number 14. Facebook needs stricter policies on misinformation. This news should be seen under the larger heading of social media regulation. And that is a damn important topic. UPSC already has asked an essay topic on social media, and question is yet to be asked in GS paper 2 under regulation in governance section. The issue of social media regulation was dealt in detail in the DNS dated 5th June. There are many questions like what is social media? Can social media act as an arbiter of truth? Why it is important to regulate social media, and the manner and the way in which social media can be regulated, that was also discussed in detail. So the legal and the moral aspect of it was discussed. What we will do here is we will add on to it the specific steps that can be taken for content management on these social media platforms. So in your notes of DNS of 5th June, you will just add this section over it. Lots of ideas have been floated for content regulation on social media platform. First and foremost, countering misinformation by correct, authentic information. Social media platform like YouTube and Facebook has been using this strategy. Recently, after the outbreak of COVID-19, YouTube has put up information panels below the video to direct the users to government websites and authentic information. This can be done in other areas in normal time as well. For example, any news related with election, you can direct that to the site of Election Commission of India. Third-party fact-checker website must be encouraged for verifying the facts, leading to flagging of fake news. These websites must be encouraged to be developed in niche areas. Certain websites can develop their niche areas, their expertise in political news. Some can do in economic news, some can do in socio-cultural news, some can do in environmental areas. Some can even take up multidisciplinary tasks of checking the facts. But encouragement of third-party fact-checker website will go a long way in flagging of fake news. Another strategy used by social media platforms is to provide warning and tips to identify misinformation. Some users are warned that they might be circulating some fake information, and this is done using new technologies like machine learning algorithms. Machine learning based programs are very useful in identifying misinformation, particularly unscientific ones, which are relatively easy to identify. There are new technologies like photo-DNA. Photo-DNA basically is some kind of stamping on any picture or video which is uploaded, and even when that is circulated by other users, downloaded and re-uploaded by other users, that initial stamping does not go. It always remain with it. So the IP address and the other information of the first uploader of that particular document will be identified. And this is deployed very extensively for identifying pornographic content and images, especially child pornography. Facebook also has announced that it is going to recruit 20,000 people in its content monitoring team. Recruitment of 15,000 already has been done. This can be made a mandatory requirement for every social media platforms above threshold number of users, say 2 lakhs. You must keep these recommendations on your tips because there's a very likely question on social media regulation in the coming mains exam. However, there are certain problems with the technologies that we have discussed. The problem is that technological solution may be effective in providing fact checks, scientific evidence, etc., but they fail in case of misinformation dealing with opinion-based news. For example, in the recent unfortunate death of a pregnant elephant in Kerala, you must have heard various kind of news and political opinion. Some verified, some unverified, some correct, some incorrect, some genuine, some fake, some in the spirit of journalism, some in the interest of TRP. It becomes extremely difficult. How will you segregate the desirable from the undesirable? Also, recently it has been seen that the fact checkers and the warning system, they are not effective and they are unable to counter against the spread of misinformation with the help of troll armies and botnets. They spread misinformation at very high rate and proliferate number of messages to number of users at a rate much higher that any fact checker or warning system can catch up with. Similarly, the political opinions, they are very subjective and mostly they'll be left with the prerogative of the companies whether they want to take action against it or not. We have seen this in the tweet of the US president where Twitter took action against the tweets of president, but the Facebook post having the same content was not pulled down by the Facebook, and Mark Zuckerberg has the stand that Facebook does not want to act as truth arbiter. So it will become very subjective. Nevertheless, it does not discount the advantages of certain measures that we have discussed just now. Things definitely comes down to an aware society and the importance of inculcation and practice of moral education. We will not take up the prelims summary today because the topics that we have covered are mostly mains oriented. But some of the questions I will frame in the DNS quiz and you please solve them. Let's take up question for the day. Answer to yesterday's question of the day is option A, Aditya. The question was, recently India's first solar powered ferry has been shortlisted for Gustav Trouvé Award. What is the name of the ferry? The name of the ferry is Aditya. Question of the day for today is, consider the following statements regarding Project Elephant. First statement, project is being implemented across the country since 1972. And the second statement, states are being given only technical assistance in achieving the objectives of the project. Options are 1 only, 2 only, both 1 and 2, or none of the above. With this, we have come to the end of the discussion video. Once again, I'll urge you to attempt the DNS quiz in order to understand how much you have grasped, and that will also be a kind of revision of today's DNS video.